George Washington. Universally regarded as one of the country's greatest leaders, the nation's first president also established the cabinet and the judiciary, and despite pressure to become king, he chose to serve just 2 terms, setting his country on firmly democratic footing. John Adams. Though a key figure in American independence and the founder of the U.S. Navy, Adams' turbulent 1 term was dominated by the XYZ affair and the controversial Alien and Sedition Acts. Thomas Jefferson. The principal author of the Declaration of Independence was a man of contradictions, a slave owner who called slavery a moral depravity, and an advocate for small government whose government more than doubled the size of the nation. James Madison. Known as the father of the Constitution, Madison led the nation through the War of 1812, which secured American independence from Britain once again. His tenure solidified the necessity of a strong federal government. James Monroe. Monroe's presidency is best known for the Monroe Doctrine, which warned European nations against colonizing or interfering in the Americas. His leadership marked the era of good feelings, characterized by a sense of national purpose and unity. John Quincy Adams. The son of America's second president had a visionary agenda that included bold infrastructure projects, but Adams' presidency was stymied by political rivalries. He later became a strong advocate against slavery, and served in the House of Representatives after his presidency. Andrew Jackson. Jackson was the founder of the Democratic Party and the first People's President, a populist promoting individual liberty. But his Indian Removal Act, which led to the tragic Trail of Tears, and opposition to the National Bank marred his legacy with controversy. Martin Van Buren. The first president born as a U.S. citizen, Van Buren dealt with the consequences of Jackson's aversion to national economic controls. Though he navigated the Panic of 1837, the 19th century's worst economic crisis, the resulting downturn overshadowed his administration. William Henry Harrison. At the time, Harrison was well known for military victories at the Battle of Tippecanoe and the War of 1812, but today he is remembered for having the shortest presidency in American history, lasting only 1 month before he died of pneumonia. John Tyler. Nicknamed his accidency, Tyler was the first vice president to become president due to the death of his predecessor. He was unpopular with both parties, but did achieve the annexation of Texas. James K. Polk. Polk was known for his expansionism, overseeing the acquisition of Oregon and the territorial gains following the Mexican-American War. This extended territory, however, also deepened sectional divides over slavery. Zachary Taylor. A national hero for his role in the Mexican-American War, Taylor was also a Southerner who fiercely opposed the expansion of slavery. Sadly, his presidency was cut short by his death in office. Millard Fillmore. Fillmore ascended to the presidency after Taylor's death and is often criticized for the Compromise of 1850 and the Fugitive Slave Act, which were attempts to quell the tensions between the North and South over slavery. Franklin Pierce. Pierce's administration saw the signing of the Kansas-Nebraska Act, which led to the violent conflict known as Bleeding Kansas. His pro-Southern policies and failure to unify the country have cast a long shadow over his legacy. James Buchanan. Buchanan's tenure is often considered one of the worst presidencies, as he watched passively as Southern states seceded and the country slid into civil war. Abraham Lincoln. Lincoln preserved the Union during the Civil War and emancipated the slaves with the 1863 Emancipation Proclamation. Assassinated early in his second term, he is revered as one of history's greatest leaders for his commitment to liberty. Andrew Johnson. No leader could come close to Lincoln, and Johnson didn't. His lenient treatment toward the South and lack of protection for its newly freed people led to him becoming the first U.S. president to be impeached. Ulysses S. Grant. A Civil War hero, his presidency was tarnished by numerous corruption scandals, though he was an advocate for the rights of African Americans. Rutherford B. Hayes. Hayes ended the Reconstruction era through the Compromise of 1877, which withdrew federal troops from the South. James A. Garfield. Garfield continued Hayes' efforts to reform the civil service, but his presidency was tragically cut short by assassination after only 6 months in office. Chester A. Arthur. Though seen in his early career as corrupt, Arthur surprised his detractors by championing and enforcing the Pendleton Civil Service Reform Act. He also modernized the U.S. Navy. Grover Cleveland. The only president to serve 2 non-consecutive terms, Cleveland was known for his battle against political corruption and his vetoing of bills that he saw as wasteful spending. His second term, however, was marred by the Panic of 1893, a severe economic depression. Benjamin Harrison. Grandson of William Henry Harrison, Benjamin Harrison supported the McKinley Tariff, which raised duties on foreign goods to protect American industry, but also increased living costs. He also signed the Sherman Antitrust Act, aimed at curbing monopolies. William McKinley. McKinley led the U.S. during the Spanish-American War, which resulted in the U.S. acquiring territories. His presidency oversaw economic prosperity, but he was assassinated in 1901. Theodore Roosevelt. Roosevelt was known for his vigorous lifestyle and robust foreign policy, famously summarized as speak softly and carry a big stick. He was a progressive reformer who established national parks and championed the conservation of natural resources. William Howard Taft. Taft focused on trust busting and also pursued constitutional amendments for income tax and direct election of senators. However, his conservatism and clashes with Roosevelt led to a split in the Republican Party. Woodrow Wilson. Wilson led the U.S. through World War I and was a key architect of the League of Nations, which he hoped would prevent future conflicts. Domestically, his presidency saw the implementation of progressive reforms, including the Federal Reserve and the Federal Trade Commission. William G. Harding. Advocating for pro-business policies and a return to normalcy after World War I, he was incredibly popular. After dying in office, however, scandals including the Teapot Dome and the revelation of an extramarital affair were unearthed and marred his legacy. Calvin Coolidge. Coolidge maintained a laissez-faire governance style and presided over an era of economic growth that characterized the Roaring Twenties. He's credited with restoring public confidence after the scandals of his predecessor, but he may have also contributed to the onset of the Great Depression. Herbert Hoover. Hoover's presidency was overwhelmed by the onset of the Great Depression, and his policies were widely criticized for failing to effectively tackle the economic downturn. Franklin D. Roosevelt. Roosevelt created the New Deal, a series of programs designed to combat the Great Depression, and he led the nation through most of World War II. His unprecedented 4 terms in office reshaped American government with increased federal involvement in the economy and welfare. Harry S. Truman. Truman concluded World War II after making the controversial decision to use atomic bombs in Japan. His post-war leadership was marked by the Marshall Plan to rebuild Europe, the beginning of the Cold War, and the Korean War. Dwight D. Eisenhower. A World War II general, Eisenhower presided over a period of relative peace and economic prosperity, and enforced desegregation of schools following the landmark Brown v. Board of Education decision. His administration also initiated the interstate highway system, transforming American infrastructure and mobility. John F. Kennedy. Known for his charismatic leadership and inspiring speeches, Kennedy launched the Peace Corps, set the goal to land a man on the moon, and steered the world away from nuclear war during the Cuban Missile Crisis. His presidency was tragically cut short by assassination, deepening his iconic status. Lyndon B. Johnson. Johnson, who took office after Kennedy's assassination, is best known for his Great Society programs, including the Civil Rights Act, but his significant escalation of the Vietnam War ultimately tarnished his legacy. Richard Nixon. Nixon opened diplomatic relations with China and initiated détente with the Soviet Union, but his presidency ended in disgrace due to the Watergate scandal, making him the only U.S. president to resign from office. Gerald Ford. Ford is remembered for his controversial pardon of Nixon, which he claimed was necessary to heal the nation, and for his steady leadership during a period of economic challenges. Jimmy Carter. Carter's presidency focused on human rights and energy conservation, but he struggled with economic stagflation and the Iran hostage crisis. Despite his mixed record in office, his post-presidential humanitarian work has enhanced his legacy. Ronald Reagan. Reagan revitalized national confidence with his policies of tax cuts, military buildup, and strong anti-Soviet stance, contributing to the end of the Cold War. His administration was also marked by economic prosperity and significant increases in national debt. George H.W. Bush. Bush managed the peaceful end of the Cold War and led a broad international coalition in the Gulf War. His presidency faced economic difficulties at home, which led to his defeat in seeking a second term. Bill Clinton. Clinton presided over the longest peacetime economic expansion in American history and was impeached in his second term due to personal scandals. His administration is also noted for significant trade agreements and welfare reform. George W. Bush. Bush responded to the September 11th attacks by launching the War on Terror, including the controversial wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. His 2 terms saw significant tax cuts and the implementation of new security measures, but ended with a major financial crisis. Barack Obama. The nation's first black president took office during a global financial crisis and responded with measures like the Affordable Care Act and the Dodd-Frank Act. Notable foreign accomplishments included the killing of Osama bin Laden. Donald Trump. The only president with no previous government or military experience, Trump's unconventional presidency successfully implemented significant tax cuts, but his term was chaotic and ended with his second impeachment, a historic first. Joe Biden. Biden's early efforts on addressing the COVID-19 pandemic and economic recovery were popular, but his administration's drawdown in Afghanistan drew widespread criticism. He has also sought to restore alliances and commitments on climate change initiatives. If you enjoyed this video and you'd like to see more that feed your curiosity about our fascinating world, be sure to subscribe.